My glands, which had been slow to develop, suddenly presented, and a raging heat came over me. But Tim just pushed me onto his younger brother. "You're a male beta," he said. "You can't handle an alpha. My brother is a beta. He's a perfect match for you." But what he didn't know was that his brother was an alpha pretending to be a beta, and my own presentation had just been severely delayed. For the next month, I didn't call Tim. I didn't send him a single text. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and showed up at the door, demanding to see me, only to be hit by a wave of rich pheromones that made his head spin. The man who had always been so calm and composed lost it, roaring, "That's your brother's partner. How could you?" The younger man wrapped his arms around me, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. "Easy there, bro," he said. "Don't be so aggressive. You're scaring my partner." "Tim, I'm so hot. I feel awful." I buried my face in Tim's chest, rubbing my cheek against him now and then. The rich scent of red wine lingered in the air. It was intoxicating. With a cold expression, Tim grabbed the back of my collar and pulled me away from him. My eyes, misty and wet, welled up as my lip trembled. Tim remained unmoved. I tugged on the corner of his shirt, sniffling quietly. "Tim, I had a glass of champagne earlier, and ever since, my body's been feeling really strange. Do you think I was drugged?" A flicker of annoyance crossed his stoic face, and his voice sharpened. "Nick, are you a child? You have zero sense of self-preservation." I fought back the ache in my chest, but tears streamed down my face. "Tim, I feel so sick. Can we please just go home? You're my fiancé." My voice was soft and timid. Tim looked down at me, then yanked his hand away. "Nick, we've been engaged for 5 years and you still haven't presented. You're destined to be a mediocre beta for the rest of your life. But I'm different. I'm an A-grade alpha. During my ruts, I need an omega sent to soothe me. Besides, you're a male beta. You can't handle an alpha." I choked back a sob and looked at him through blurry eyes. "So, you're not going to help me?" Tim turned his head away, his voice flat and emotionless. "Nick, I can help you, but I can't be responsible for you. My mate has to be an omega." The pain that had been welling up inside me slowly flooded my entire body. He'd sleep with me, but he wouldn't take responsibility for me. What kind of logic was that? "Are you saying you want to break off our engagement?" Tim's patience was gone. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with endless contempt. "Yes. Stop chasing after me. Throwing yourself at me like this is just cheap. My brother's a beta. He'd be a perfect match for you." His omega secretary walked over. "Mr. Hall, there's a problem with the company's bidding project." Tim took the documents from her and walked away without another glance at me. After Tim left, the other people at the party started whispering and staring at me. Their looks of contempt and mockery melted into the bright lights of the hall. TSK, once a simp, always a simp. A mediocre male beta actually dreaming of an A-grade alpha. Some people really have no shame. How could a male beta possibly satisfy an alpha in bed? A wave of shame washed over me. The very air around me felt like 1,000 tiny blades, making every breath a struggle. The Tim from before was so different from the Tim of today. Back then, he would have doted on me, comforted me, and even surprised me with little things. When people insulted me for being a beta, Tim would stand up for me. "Nick's just a late bloomer," he'd say. "He's not a beta." But 5 years into our engagement, I still showed no signs of presenting. Tim's attitude towards me grew colder and colder, eventually turning into annoyance. I often wondered, would things be different if I were an omega? But what's so damn inferior about being a beta? Anyway, tears I couldn't control welled up in my eyes. I bit my lip, trying to hide my pathetic state. "Nick, stop being a fool. Just stop." A warm suit jacket was draped over my shoulders. I looked up. It was Tim's brother, Hayden. Like me, he was also a beta. Hayden put an arm around my shoulder, a sarcastic smile on his lips. "What's wrong with being a beta? You're all so disgusting, putting others down with your blatant secondary gender discrimination just to feel superior." With that, he swept me up into his arms and carried me out of there. I sat in his Bugatti, clutching the seatbelt tightly, unable to stop whimpering. A tingling itch spread through my veins, my body so weak I couldn't muster any strength. The car filled with a rich, fragrant scent of bamboo. Hayden's brow furrowed. "What's wrong with you?" My body trembled, and my voice was choked with sobs. "I don't know. My body feels so weird. Am I dying?" Hayden pulled the car over, unbuckled his seatbelt, and leaned in close. He peeled off my scent patch and examined the back of my neck. A moment later, he cursed under his breath. I leaned against him, gasping for air like a drowning man. "Nick, you're presenting. I'm calling my brother right now to come get you." I grabbed the hand reaching for his phone. "Don't call him. I don't want him. He's about to break up with me. I can't keep being a pathetic fool for him." "Nick, are you sure you're done with him?" "Yes, I'm done with him." My voice was quiet but firm. A heart is made of flesh, it can hurt. The accumulated bitterness and disappointment had become too much to bear. It was time for this crush to end. I clung to Hayden's shoulder, looking up with misty eyes. "I feel so awful. Can you please help me?" His deep, dark eyes were unnervingly intense. "I'm just a beta." With no relief in sight, I grew anxious and started tugging at his clothes, pressing my face into the crook of his neck. "I don't care. They all say betas are smaller, so it won't hurt as much." Hayden cupped my face, whispering in my ear, "You have no idea how deadly you are when you flirt." He pulled the engagement ring off my finger and tossed it out the car window. From the underground garage to the elevator, through the hallway and past the front door, Hayden kissed me all the way back to his room. His kisses trailed downwards, soft and insistent. The spark had become a wildfire. Under his heated breath, I melted into a puddle. The scent of bamboo filled the entire room. I pulled off Hayden's shirt, my hands exploring the smooth, tight lines of his muscles as my eyes traveled lower. I froze, asking in a daze, "Aren't you a beta? You don't look like one at all." Hayden let out a sudden, deep, husky laugh. "Baby, you're so cute." The rich aroma of dark chocolate, tinged with a slight bitterness, began to fill the air. I was a total chocoholic. I loved every kind of chocolate without question. His pheromones, far stronger than any of grade alphas, enveloped me completely, a suffocating, inescapable dome of scent. Under its influence, I fell apart completely. I may have been inexperienced, but I wasn't clueless. After a moment, it hit me. "You're an alpha pretending to be a beta." "That's right. And now it's too late for you to have any regrets." His playful tone had a wicked edge to it. His sharp canines bit into my scent gland, and he forcefully injected his pheromones into me. The scents of bamboo and dark chocolate intertwined. For the next month, I experienced firsthand the raw power and dominance of an alpha. My sobs were broken and incoherent. Hayden's voice was a low, gentle coaxing. "Nick, repeat after me. From now on, I like Hayden the most." After a busy month, Tim finally sorted out his company's affairs. The original project manager had quit, taking the proposal with them to a competitor. In just 1 month, Tim's team had to scrap the old plan and work around the clock to create a new one. To reward his employees, Tim had his secretary book a hotel for a celebration. After a few drinks, Tim rubbed his throbbing temples, feeling a bit drunk. He looked at the clinking glasses and bustling dinner table and couldn't help but think of Nick. Nick was so thoughtful. He always carried hangover pills and stomach medicine with him. When Tim drank too much, Nick would tug on his sleeve, whining softly, begging him to drink less. Some drinks were unavoidable, and Tim would inevitably overdo it. Nick would stay by his side, taking care of him all night long. The next morning, there would be a bowl of warm porridge and hangover pills waiting on the table. Nick wasn't just kind, he was also stunningly beautiful. Friends always said that if Nick ever presented, he'd undoubtedly be a top-tier omega. Tim had waited patiently for Nick for 5 years, but Nick showed no signs of presenting at all. Gradually, anticipation turned into annoyance. For the past month, Nick hadn't called or texted him once. Tim figured Nick was probably heartbroken after hearing he wanted to break off the engagement and was just waiting for him to come and make things right. In that case, he'd be magnanimous and go comfort him. Tim imagined Nick would, as always, take the opportunity to ask for a hug and then say with a smile, "Tim, I like you the most." Even if Nick couldn't be his mate, he could still keep him on the side. After all, Nick was so completely in love with him. A month later, the chaotic heat finally ended. The room was a thick blend of bamboo and dark chocolate scents. I pulled a large shirt from the closet and, fighting through the discomfort in my body, tiptoed out of the room. Hayden was standing by the window on the phone. His voice was ice cold. "Keep an eye on the Hall Corporation. Start acquiring their shares." The chill in his eyes was startling. Compared to Tim, the officially recognized heir of the Hall family, Hayden was just an ordinary beta, known for being a reckless, good-for-nothing playboy. Whenever their father, Frank Hall, mentioned Hayden, it was always with a headache. It was widely accepted that Hayden was nowhere near Tim's equal. But the man on the phone now was rattling off business terms one after another, his tone calm and strategic. "I'm gonna make Frank Hall pay for what he did." His grim, ruthless tone sent a shiver down my spine that, combined with my weak legs, caused me to collapse to the floor with a thud. Hearing the noise, Hayden hung up and walked over to me. I swallowed hard, instinctively shrinking back. Now that I'd seen his wolf in sheep's clothing act, was he going to silence me? An arm slid under my knees, and Hayden bent down to carry me back to the room. His dark gaze held a cryptic, profound meaning. "All dressed up like this so early in the morning. Are you trying to tell me you're not satisfied?" Terrified, I dove under the covers, burying myself completely. "No, you've got it all wrong. Any more and I think I'd actually break." Seeing my determined expression, Hayden burst out laughing. He reached out and gently pinched the gland on the back of my neck, leaning in close. "You know to be scared. Good. Then just stay put and be good. You exploited me for a whole month. How are we going to settle that score?" I exploited him? How could he say that with a straight face? Hayden's words pissed me off so much I shot up in bed. "Exploited you? I'm clearly the one who got the short end of the stick here." Hayden placed a hand on my waist, pulling me into his arms. "Fine, you got the short end of the stick. So how do you want me to make it up to you? How about I give myself to you as compensation?" Hayden stared at me, a silent warning in his eyes. If I dared to say no, I was pretty sure he'd flip out on the spot. "All right, fine. I'll reluctantly accept." A newly marked Omega becomes incredibly dependent on their Alpha. After my heat ended, I stayed at Hayden's place for a few more days. During that time, Tim called me once. As I answered, Hayden wrapped his arms around me, his sharp canines toying with my scent gland. His eyes were dark and intense. I was always the one who called Tim. In the 5 years we were together, I could count the number of times he called me on one hand. "Do you need something? Are you free Saturday night? I'd like to take you to dinner." The arm around my waist tightened, and Hayden's eyes narrowed. "I'm busy. Can't make it." Hearing my answer, Hayden let out a low, satisfied laugh. The voice on the other end of the line dropped several degrees. "Nick, there's a limit to this childishness. I'm extending an olive branch. Don't be a fool." Taking me to dinner was his olive branch. Whenever we argued, I was always the one to back down first, to coax him with a soft voice and sincerely try to calm him down. "Tim, I know you're tired of me, but you couldn't bring yourself to break up because of the engagement, afraid of what people would say. I know you were just waiting for me to say it, right? As soon as I did, you could cut ties cleanly without offending my family. Well, today I'm giving you your wish. From this day on, I won't bother you anymore." When I got home, I immediately told my alpha father that I wanted to end the engagement. Among the 6 secondary genders, male betas have an extremely low fertility rate. Seeing that I still hadn't presented, Frank Hall was more than happy for me to be the one to call it off. A week after the engagement was broken, I ran into Tim at a club. He had just finished a business dinner and was completely drunk. Tim stumbled towards me. I backed away, and he lunged into empty air. Before, whenever he opened his arms, I would have happily rushed into his embrace, cuddling up to him and asking for affection. Tim would have refused me with a cold face, Nick, you're not a child anymore. Can't you be more mature? I could never understand it. Why was asking my own boyfriend for a hug considered immature? Tim looked at me, a little dazed, unable to believe I had dodged him. Nick, I drank a lot tonight. My head hurts and my stomach hurts, too. He just stood there, expecting me to coddle and care for him like I always did. Unfortunately for him, he had already lost that thoughtful, attentive Nick for good. Tim, we've broken up. You shouldn't be saying this to me. Broken up? I never agreed to break up. I found it laughable. He wouldn't marry me. He wanted to sleep with me but not take responsibility. And he wouldn't let me break up with him. In his mind, what exactly was I to him? A servant he could summon and dismiss at will? I didn't want to get tangled up with a drunk. As I turned to leave, Tim grabbed my wrist. I couldn't break free, and my brows knitted together. If you don't let go, I'm going to scream harassment. Tim's face turned cold. Harassment? Nick, when you were throwing yourself at me, why didn't you call it harassment then? Hearing those words, a bitter sense of injustice washed over me. 5 years of devotion hadn't earned me an ounce of respect, just the accusation of throwing myself at him. Tim, was my love really that cheap in your eyes? In the struggle, Tim saw the blocker patch on my neck. His grip on my wrist tightened fiercely. His eyes narrowed as he gritted his teeth. Aren't you a beta? Why are you wearing a blocker patch? I stomped on his foot hard and used the moment to break free. I let out a sneer. What's it to you? The alcohol seemed to wear off in an instant. Tim laughed, but it was a furious, humorless sound as he unleashed his pheromones to try and dominate me. The scent of an A-grade alpha washed over me, a tidal wave threatening to drown me. Stimulated by his pheromones, I could smell my own scent starting to leak out. You presented, Tim stated, a flash of surprise in his eyes. You presented as an omega. The next second, that surprise morphed into terrifying rage. His eyes locked onto me like a predator. Your scent, it's mixed with another alpha's. Hayden's temporary mark hadn't completely faded yet. My bamboo scent was still intertwined with the faint aroma of dark chocolate. You let another alpha mark you. His voice was heavy, each word dripping with thunderous fury. His pheromones slammed into me, making my head spin and my consciousness blur. A cold sweat beaded on my temples. I forced myself to stand straight, to look him directly in the eye. That night at the party, I told you I felt sick, but you chose to abandon me. I thought you were lying then, and you were just a beta. A sarcastic smile touched my lips. I cut off his explanation. What? When I was a beta, I wasn't worthy of getting into your bed. But now that I'm an omega, I am. Tim, don't you feel disgusted with yourself when you say that? When I was in love with you, you ignored me and treated me with cold indifference. Now that I'm the one breaking things off, you won't let it go. Tim, aren't you pathetic? My words finally pushed Tim over the edge. His pheromones erupted chaotically. I gritted my teeth, enduring the stinging pain in my neck, refusing to show any weakness to an alpha. Just as we were locked in a standoff, Hayden appeared. He wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me into his embrace. Bro, if you don't get yourself under control, you're going to be a headline on the morning news. The company just won that bid. Dad wouldn't want a scandal at such a critical time. The intense alpha pheromones were already affecting the people around us. Tim calmed down, his gaze locked on the hand resting on my waist. He held out a hand to Hayden, signaling for him to hand me over. Hayden reassuringly patted my lower back. He didn't move, just gave Tim a lazy, roguish grin. Bro, you can't just kidnap a guy in public. Why don't you ask him if he wants to go with you? With that, he turned his head towards me and gave me a little wink. I shook my head. Tim, there's no chance for us anymore. I'm not going with you. Bro, Nick said he doesn't want to go with you. Tim's secretary hurried over, whispering something urgently in his ear. Hearing her words, Tim clenched his fists. He shot Hayden a resentful glare before reluctantly leaving. I suddenly felt light as I was swept up into someone's arms. I wrapped my arms around his neck and asked curiously, "What did you do?" "Nothing much. Just moved my plans up a bit. You mess with my person, you have to pay the price." Hayden carried me back to the car and released his pheromones to soothe me. His sharp canines pierced the delicate skin of my gland, forcefully injecting his alpha scent. He didn't stop until the scent of red wine was completely gone from me, until I was thoroughly drenched in the aroma of dark chocolate. Alphas have a strong territorial instinct. They don't want their omegas smelling like any other alpha. I closed my eyes, leaning against his chest and mumbling, "So possessive." Hayden didn't deny it. He brushed my hair aside and placed a soft kiss on my forehead. "I will make him pay for what he did today." Hayden held me tight, his voice dangerously cold. An alpha publicly harassing an omega with pheromones was equivalent to sexual assault. I opened my eyes. "You're not going to pretend to be a wolf in sheep's clothing anymore?" He's pushed me too far. It would be rude not to push back now. I hesitated, but finally asked the question that was burning in my mind. "Hayden, why did you pretend to be a beta?" Fearing it was a sensitive topic, I quickly added, "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." Hayden took my hand, playing with my fingers gently. "There's nothing I can't talk about. Tim's mother would never allow an illegitimate son to be more outstanding than her own. By acting mediocre, I made her let her guard down." "Doesn't your dad do anything?" Hayden snorted. "Frank Hall is a scumbag. Why would he care about me? He's the one who forced himself on my mother back then, and then turned around and accused her of seducing him. They owe my mother. I'm going to make them pay it back 1,000 times over." There was an accident at the construction site for the Hall Corporation's new project. The investigation revealed that the company had used substandard building materials. The client terminated the contract and sued for damages. Shortly after, the Hall Corporation was exposed for falsifying its books and evading taxes. In a single day, the company was thrown into turmoil, and its stock price plummeted. Besides the company's troubles, Tim's mother's family, the Brooks, were also in a panic over a broken capital chain. One disaster after another pushed Tim to the brink of collapse. He refused to believe his useless Talbal brother had this kind of power. He was an A-grade alpha. Hayden was just a beta. As the heir to the Hall Corporation, he had received the best education since he was a child. In school, he got straight A's. The moment he graduated, he became the general manager of the company, and in just 3 years, he earned the trust of the shareholders and became the CEO. He had been the golden boy his entire life. And Hayden, before he was 18, he lived in the slums of the capital, receiving the lowest form of education. How could an illegitimate son like that even be compared to him? What he hated most was that Hayden had stolen his partner right out from under his nose. The more Tim thought about it, the angrier he got, and he started trashing his office. The scent of red wine grew stronger as his pheromones spiraled out of control. Rage and frustration gnawed at his heart like two worms. At this critical moment, Tim went into a rut. He called his secretary and told her to get him suppressants and energy supplements. When he got home, Tim went straight to the liquor cabinet, trying to use the strong alcohol to quell the storm inside him. The secretary came in with the supplies and released her candy-scented pheromones to entice him. With bloodshot eyes, Tim lunged at her. The secretary leaned into his embrace, a triumphant smile on her face. "Mr. Hall, let me help you." Tim bit down on her neck, murmuring a name over and over again. "Nick, Nick." After putting me to sleep, Hayden tiptoed to the study for a video conference. Starting in his sophomore year of college, Hayden had secretly founded a tech company behind Frank Hall's back, Ocean. With his keen business sense and ruthless tactics, he quickly grew Ocean into a powerhouse. Today, Ocean holds dozens of patents for cutting-edge technologies, making it an undeniable force in the industry. The boss of Ocean was a mysterious figure who never gave interviews and never appeared in public. Other than a few key executives, no one had ever seen the face of the person in charge. This led to widespread speculation. But no matter how hard they tried to guess, no one could have imagined that the boss of Ocean was the infamous Playboy second son of the Hall family. When the camera turned on, the executives stared at the scratch marks on their boss's neck, their minds racing. To protect their boss's image, Assistant Shaw discreetly sent Hayden a message to warn him. Hayden touched the scratches on his neck, a vision of a certain someone clawing at him flashing in his mind. The coldness in his eyes melted into a warm spring pool. Seeing this look of a young man in love stunned the executives. Having worked with him for years, they all knew Hayden as a ruthless shark who ate people alive. Privately, they called him the Reaper. "Your boss's partner did this," he said. It sounded like an explanation, but it was really a boast. The executives, quick on the uptake, immediately launched into a 10-minute-long praise session for their boss's partner, whom they had never met. The Reaper looked thoroughly pleased. After the business report, the executives logged off, and Assistant Shaw continued to report on the Hall Corporation's situation. Hayden's eyes turned icy. "Proceed as planned. Show no mercy. An alpha's mouth is full of lies. They say one thing and do another." Remembering someone's wicked behavior from last night, I clutched my aching back and kicked out at Hayden. Hayden caught my ankle and pulled me into his arms. "Provoking me this early in the morning? Have you thought about the consequences?" I swallowed hard and silently scooted away from him. After breakfast, Hayden said he was taking me to meet his friends. Fearing I'd refuse, he goaded me. "What, are you scared to meet my friends? Worried they won't like you?" I shot him a glare. "I look this good. Why would I be afraid to meet people? Stop making things up." When Hayden and I arrived, everyone was already there. After some brief introductions, I quietly retreated to a corner to sip my juice. A stunningly beautiful Omega came over to chat with me. He was Julian, a well-known figure in the Federal Department of Armaments. When two Omegas get together, it's inevitable they'll start complaining about their alphas. Just as we were getting into it, two clueless alphas came over and interrupted our private talk. "Julian, didn't we agree you wouldn't expose all my secrets in public?" Federal Major General Brandon pretended to be angry. Julian, knowing full well it was an act, played along and sweetly fed him a grape. Brandon couldn't keep up the act for more than 3 seconds. One was teasing, the other was laughing along. They were the very picture of happiness. "No need to be jealous. I'll feed you." Hayden picked up a grape and held it to my lips. I looked up and met Hayden's gentle, love-filled eyes, and a sudden warmth spread through my chest. I quickly looked down, not daring to meet his gaze. The intensity in his eyes felt unreal. However, Hayden had no intention of letting me go. He leaned down, bringing our faces close until our eyes clearly reflected each other. "Nick, when you're with me, you'll never have to be jealous of anyone. My feelings for you were never just a whim." After the chaotic rut ended, Tim stared at the Omega beside him, his mind buzzing. Memories of the past 7 days flashed before his eyes like a sped-up film. When the Omega woke up, he released his pheromones, which wrapped around Tim's arm as he leaned dependently into his embrace. Tim's face was cold. He shoved him away, his voice filled with fury. "You tricked me." The Alpha's pheromones crashed down on the Omega like a tidal wave. In the terrifying, suffocating silence, the Omega's heart beat erratically. "Mr. Hall," the Omega pleaded in a low voice. Tim's voice was mocking and cold. "Get that mark washed off as soon as you can." During his 7-day rut, the turmoil at the Hall Corporation had only escalated. The company's top executives were in chaos. Many shareholders chose to sell off their shares. Even after 7 days, his assistant still couldn't pinpoint who was behind it all. Unable to sit still any longer, Tim went to Hayden's apartment himself to demand answers. The person who opened the door was Nick. Nick was wearing loungewear, and the scent of dark chocolate on him was sickeningly strong. Tim looked past him and saw Hayden cooking in the kitchen. It all clicked. "Hayden, you've been pretending to be a beta." Hayden admitted it freely. If I were an alpha, your mother, Lauren, would never have let me live this long." The man who had always been so calm and composed lost control, screaming, "He was my partner. How could you?" Hayden wrapped his arms around me, a smug look on his face. "Easy there, bro. Don't be so loud. You're scaring your new brother-in-law." Tim's head snapped toward me. "You knew all along, didn't you? You conspired with him to trick me." I thought he was being paranoid and rolled my eyes, not wanting to deal with him. His gaze darted between me and Hayden. He laughed coldly. "Good. Fine. Just perfect. Nick, do you really think he likes you? He's just using you to get back at me." He only sought you out because you were in love with me. Hayden laughed, his posture arrogant as he spoke with feigned nonchalance. Tim, you really think highly of yourself. I don't need to sacrifice my own love and marriage just to deal with you. Tim was trembling with rage, his breathing ragged. Hayden, don't get cocky. How much do you think Nick can really like you? 2 months ago, he was still licking my boots. Unbelievable. It's like he'd die if he didn't put me down. Hayden hooked an arm around my waist and looked at me with deep affection. It's okay. As long as he's willing to be with me, I don't care about any of that. I'd be happy even without a title or status. His whole faux pitiful act sent a shiver down my spine. Tim's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. I had to admit it was satisfying. Do you have anything else to say? Get it all out now so you don't have to resort to stirring up trouble behind our backs. Tim just stammered, you, unable to form a coherent sentence, the veins in his neck bulging. Hayden, the foundations of the Hall and Brooke families aren't something you can just destroy. You've never beaten me at anything in your life, and you'll end up crushed under my foot this time, too. You and your mother will never be anything but second-rate. Couldn't hold back anymore. I slapped him across the face. Tim, falling for you is the biggest mistake of my life. When you can't handle things yourself, you bring up someone's mother. You're the one who's second-rate. Tim clutched his face, looking at me in disbelief. Nick, you actually hit me. For him. I slapped him again. That's right, I hit you. After all the times you've insulted me, I've only slapped you twice. I'm still the one getting the short end of the stick. After Tim left, Hayden held me with a force that felt like he wanted to merge me into his very bones. He rested his head in the crook of my neck like a big, wounded dog. His mother was a nerve he couldn't bear to have touched. Tim's words had reopened old wounds. I reached out and patted his back, comforting him gently. If that psycho ever comes looking for trouble again, I'll tear him down for you. Hayden didn't speak. He just squeezed my hand and pressed a soft kiss to my palm. The storm at the Hall family hadn't even subsided when Tim was trending on social media again. The paparazzi had photographed him taking his Omega secretary to get a mark removal surgery. The Omega was crying her eyes out, kneeling on the ground and begging him. Mr. Hall, I'm pregnant with your child. If I have the surgery now, the baby won't survive. The alpha's face was merciless, and his words were chilling. Then get rid of it. This child was the result of your scheming anyway. The short, 15-second video once again put the Hall family and Tim himself in the spotlight. Netizens were shocked. They couldn't believe that beneath Tim's humble and gentlemanly exterior was such a beast. As the public outcry grew, Frank Hall's old scandal was dug up. Years ago, Frank Hall had used his drunkenness as an excuse to force himself on a female subordinate, then turned around and framed her for seducing him. When his wife, Lauren Brooke, found out, she took her anger out on the subordinate, sabotaging her at every turn, sending people to harass her, branding her as the other woman, and leading online mobs to cyberbully her. In the end, the brilliant, top university graduate who should have had a bright future was forced into the slums to live in obscurity. The cyberbullying that woman had endured now came back to haunt them. Overnight, the 3 members of the Hall family became public pariahs, hated by everyone online. After a month of turmoil, the Hall Corporation ended up bankrupt and was acquired. Surprisingly, it was Ocean that stepped in to take over the mess. On the day the contract was signed, Hayden showed up in person as the head of Ocean. Tim stared at him, murmuring in disbelief. How is that possible? He's just an illegitimate son who grew up in the gutter. He can't be better than me. Frank Hall felt like he had never truly seen his second son. Why? I'm your biological father. Do you hate me that much? Hayden laughed coldly. If it weren't for you, my mother wouldn't have been forced to work as a cleaner at a dump, only to die of cancer. You owe her, and I'm here to collect. Frank Hall collapsed back into his chair, looking like he'd aged a decade in an instant. After taking over the Hall Corporation, Hayden immediately had the Inspection Bureau thoroughly investigate its past financial reports. The investigation revealed that Frank Hall had evaded over $7 billion in taxes since taking office. The number shocked the entire Star network. Considering all of his crimes, the federal court sentenced him to life in prison. The cunning alpha finally paid the price for his sins. On the day of the verdict, Hayden went to change his last name from Hall to White. White was his mother's surname. From then on, there was only Hayden White, no longer Hayden Hall. After changing his name, Hayden bought some daisies and took me to the cemetery to see his mother. Hayden's voice was low and hoarse. "Mom, I personally sent that bastard to prison. Seeing him like this made my heart ache." I took his hand, lacing our fingers together. "And don't worry, I'll take good care of him." Hayden squeezed my hand. "What do you mean, Auntie? Call her Mom." After acquiring the Hall Corporation, Hayden restructured it and merged it into Ocean. He was so busy that he worked overtime for a week straight. When I got a message that he was 5 minutes from home, I went downstairs to wait for him. As the car slid slowly into the complex, I walked happily toward him. When I was about 100 meters away, Tim, who had been hiding in the shadows, lunged out and grabbed me, holding a dagger to my neck. Tim's eyes were bloodshot, his face contorted with madness. "Hayden White, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have ended up like this." A cold sweat broke out on Hayden's palms, his heart leaping into his throat. "Tim, calm down first. Let's talk this through." The hand holding the dagger tightened. A sharp pain pricked my neck, followed by a trickle of blood. "Calm down? You destroyed everything I had. How do you expect me to calm down?" Seeing Hayden's panic, he laughed with even more glee. "It seems you care about him a lot. Our grudge is between us. There's no need to involve him. Hayden White, you're in no position to bargain with me right now." Hayden raised his hands and backed away. "Fine. Then tell me what you want." Tim was beyond reason. "Everything I wanted was destroyed by you. If you want to save him, fine. You have to get on your knees and beg me." I kept a close eye on Tim's state, running through the self-defense moves I had learned. The strength difference between an alpha and an omega was huge. I only had one chance. I had to succeed on the first try. Hayden lowered himself, starting to kneel. "Fine. I'm begging you." Seeing this, Tim trembled with delight. I seized the opportunity. I spun, shoved his arm away, and slammed my head back, breaking free and running towards Hayden. Completely enraged, Tim charged after me. Hayden caught me, holding me tightly in his arms. The dagger plunged into his lower back. The world suddenly went quiet. All I could hear was a ringing in my ears. In the chaos, another figure ran out and stabbed Tim. It was the Omega he had forced to have an abortion. "Tim, you destroyed me," she cried. "Now I'm going to destroy you with my own hands." Tim was pronounced dead after resuscitation efforts failed. The Omega was convicted of intentional homicide. I was peeling an apple for Hayden when I heard the news. This master of manipulation was using his injury as an excuse to have me wait on him hand and foot. I handed him the peeled apple. He didn't take it. "Hayden White, don't play games with me. It's your back that's hurt, not your hands." Hayden didn't say a word, just looked at me with those big, pitiful eyes. "Nick." My heart softened as I remembered him shielding me without a moment's hesitation. Hayden chomped happily on his apple, lecturing Assistant Shaw. "Shaw, when you look for a partner in the future, you should find someone like Nick. Not only does she peel apples, she even feeds them to me." Assistant Shaw, having been force-fed this public display of affection, looked completely done. My face flushed red, and I pinched Hayden to shut him up. He took the opportunity to grab my hand. Assistant Shaw couldn't take it anymore and made an excuse about work to leave. That night, Hayden invited me to sleep in the same bed with him. I refused, worried I'd press on his wound. "It's been a week. The wound is mostly healed. Besides, I'm a very still sleeper." His tone was full of grievance. The cunning alpha released his pheromones to entice me. Once I was in bed, his hands started to wander, his intentions not at all hidden. His hand roamed over my stomach. Warm kisses fell upon my skin. Under the influence of his pheromones, my consciousness began to drift. With my last shred of sanity, I pressed his hand down. "No, Hayden, your wound isn't fully healed." His magnetic voice was a low coaxing in my ear. "I won't move. Nick, don't you want me?" The scents of dark chocolate and bamboo mingled together. The moonlight was like water, and so were we. Hayden's epilogue. Hayden's mother was a very gentle woman. No matter what she suffered outside, she always had a smile on her face when she came home. When he was little and they couldn't afford school fees, his mother taught him herself. Hayden didn't understand. Why was his brilliant, well-educated mother stuck working as a garbage collector in the slums? Later, he pieced together the truth from whispers and gossip. Hayden felt that the other half of the blood flowing in his veins was utterly filthy. But his mother would stroke his head and comfort him. "You did nothing wrong, sweetie. Mommy will always love you." But she died 3 days after Hayden finished his final exams. From years of working at the dump, she had developed lung cancer. Hayden wiped his tears, returned to the Hall family pretending to be a beta, and bided his time. Frank Hall ignored him completely. Frank Hall's legal wife, Lauren Brooke, despised him, her words dripping with insults about his mother. Tim never gave him the time of day. Even the servants at the Hall household treated him like he was nothing. The first person to show him any respect after he returned to the Hall family was Nick. Nick didn't judge him for being an illegitimate son. When outsiders insulted him, Nick would stand up for him. "He's my future brother-in-law." Hayden's heart stirred, but he found those words strangely grating. Nick was perfect in every way, except for his terrible taste in men. He had fallen for Tim. Because Nick was a late bloomer, Tim's attitude towards him grew colder and colder. Soon, Tim started seeing other Omegas behind Nick's back. Hayden leaked the information to Nick, guiding him to discover Tim's treachery. The more disappointed Nick became with Tim, the happier Hayden was. Hayden stayed by his side, offering comfort at just the right moments, slowly seeping into his life. Finally, on the day Nick presented, he snatched him up. And he never let go.